is Letaro, and I will be facilitating this evening's session. Tonight, we dive into the wonderful world of global governance and youth engagement with our theme, Understanding the G20, Y20, and U20, Key Insights for Young People. We're thrilled to have some brilliant speakers from these different platforms who are going to be breaking down what these platforms are and helping us explore how young people in South Africa can plug into these global conversations and spaces. Before we begin, just a couple of house rules to ensure that we have a smooth webinar. Please keep your microphone muted at all times, unless during your discussions in the Q&A. You are welcome to keep your cameras open if your bandwidth allows. It's always lovely seeing some great faces on screen. Please do use the chat function to share your thoughts, your comments, or your questions throughout the webinar. And then during the Q&A, please raise your hand or indicate in the chat if you would like to open your mic and speak. And lastly, please note that this session is being recorded for documentation purposes. I hope that we will be able to speak and share our insights and just have a respectable and supportive environment to share and grow. This is our agenda for this evening. Like I said, I will be a facilitator. From then on, we'll be getting a message of support from the Younger 2025 LCOY Working Group. We'd go into an overview of what LCOY 2025 is and what LCOY South Africa looks like. Then we'll be doing a presentation for each of the different platforms. So a presentation for the G20, for the Y20, as well as the U20. And then the most exciting part, to get your engagements on everything that has been shared, we'll have a Q&A session, and then this will be concluded by a vote of thanks. Next slide, please. So first up on our agenda today is a message of support from Dauda Cham. Dauda is a Gambian environment and climate change leader with 6 years experience. He holds a BSc in biology from the University of the Gambia and is currently pursuing a Master's of Science in Environmental Science at Södertörn University in Sweden. He received the Climate Action Award at the Maiden National Youth Awards by the National Youth Parliament of the Gambia. Serving as Deputy Executive Director of Help Gambia, an NGO focused on reducing communities' vulnerability to climate change, Dauda advocates strongly for youth inclusion in the climate policy-making processes and implementation, emphasizing their role in shaping sustainable environmental strategies. He is also a UNFCCC youth negotiator for the Gambia, focusing on climate adaptation and finance. He is the LCOY co-liaison for 2025, supporting the implementation of 110 LCOYs globally. Over to you, Dauda.
Right. Thank you so much, moderator, for that wonderful introduction. And I just want to send warm greetings to everyone on the call. It's really an honor for me to be here to share a message of support. But before that, I would just like to congratulate the team for putting this together. I think I would say LCOY South Africa is one of the proactive LCOY organizers this year that we have. I've been following your activities on social media, specifically on LinkedIn. And I just also want to thank my friend, my colleague, Malihi, for facilitating this. I've worked with her during COP28. We were delegates of the UAE program for youth delegates, and as well as a video or a film project that we've also been part of. So thank you so much, Mo, for facilitating my participation here. Yes, so on behalf of the LCOY working group and in my capacity as a coalition for this year, I just want to extend my heartfelt congratulations to the team, like I said, for this wonderful initiative. And I just also hope that you will all work together as young people from South Africa to ensuring that this LCOY becomes a success. I believe that when we put our efforts together as young people, we can be able to not only make impact in our own regions, but also to impact global policies on climate change. And just to shed some light on the importance of LCOYs, this is a project of Yongo, and I think it started in 2019 when young people from around the globe met at, I think the COP, was it COP, I think COP 15 or so. I am not really able to remember the exact COP, and realized that there is really a vacuum when it comes to the participation of young people in the negotiation processes and the whole global climate policy processes. And they thought it wise to come up with an initiative like this, where young people in their countries at their local levels can actually come together to share their ideas and their perspectives. And since then, this project has been going on, and I think it is one of Yongo's most important projects. For some of you who may not know what Yongo is, it is actually the Children and Youth Constituency as part of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And again, just a message of solidarity. Like I said, as African young people, I know Africa is one of the, if not the most impacted continent when it comes to climate change issues. Yet we really have limited access when it comes to being part of climate policy processes like the COPs, the SBs, and so on. So I think this is really important, and that we organize ourselves and make the best use of this platform, that we make sure that our voices are really heard when it comes to climate change issues. So take these consultations or this webinar very serious, and other consultations that will come up where you will share your ideas, so that you come up with a very strong national youth statement, which can also be incorporated in our global youth statement as we lead up to COP30 in Belém in Brazil. So I wouldn't want to say much, but also the final thing I just wanted to say, for some of you who may not be part of Yongo, if you would like to be part of Yongo, I think I've shared some important information with the team. Maybe they will share that with you so that you can also engage in that platform, because it is very important when it comes to engaging in climate change issues as young people. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm happy to see that you're making a lot of progress when it comes to LCOY 2025 in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dowda, for that warm message of support. There are links on how to join Yango that the team will share to give an overview of what LCOY South Africa 2025 looks like. Our co-focal point, Londi Webutelezi. Over to you, Londi.
Thank you so much. I just want to share my screen quickly. Okay, thanks. Quickly, can you guys see my screen? Yes?
Yep. Yes,
Okay.
Yes, we can.
Thank you so much, Letago. As you said, my name is Londiwe, and I'm one of the co-contact points for LCOY South Africa 2025. And I'll just be taking you guys briefly through what we are envisioning for LCOY 2025. Okay. So LCOY 2025 is being co-hosted, LCOY South Africa 2025, sorry, is being co-hosted by the Global Shapers Tone Hub, by SACAN, which is the South Africa Climate Action Network, by ACRP, the Africa Climate Reality Project, ALA, ACA, which is African Climate Alliance, as well as GAMA, which is the Global Africa Model United Nations Agency. That was a mouthful. We also brought on a media partner, Voices of Mzansi. And just briefly, what is LCOY? So LCOY is the local conference of youth, as I said previously, and okay, thanks. So LCOY is the local conference of youth, as Dauda explained. It is a Yango initiative, and Yango is the youth constituency of the UNFCCC, and it is being held worldwide. And just quick fun fact, which is not here, but Africa currently is hosting the biggest number of LCOYs, so yay us. And there's also ARCOY, which is the regional one, but we are ALCOY because it is national, and ALCOY South Africa because it's being hosted in South Africa. And ALCOY 2025 is actually building off the achievements of ALCOY South Africa 2024, which aim to connect local and global voices by providing local and national context for climate finance, as well as the just transition. So ALCOY South Africa 2024, which I hope most of you guys were there, it was a two-part conference, and one of the achievements from that was the development of the National Youth Statement on Just Transition, which I'll speak briefly about in my next slides. By the way, we can share this. I'll share a link to it in the chat for anyone that doesn't have access to it. Do check it out. It's a very comprehensive document. And a few highlights from the youth position on just transition. It was the product of the in-person event from LCOY SA 2024. And it highlighted the socioeconomic context of South Africa and emphasis on the legacy of apartheid, as well as how that influences the just transition. And just also on that, it was co-authored by South African youth. Thank you very much to everyone that took part in that, and we hope you guys will continue with us into 2024. But the statement also ends with climate-based recommendations by South African youth for a just transition to ensure that the just transition is socially equitable as well as inclusive of young people. And it is also consistent with UNFCCC technical terminology. Thank you. Oh, that was a bit of a mouthful. So bringing us to ALCOY South Africa 2025, which is building on the success of ALCOY South Africa 2024. Like I said, it is being co-hosted by the Global Shapers Tshwane Hub, by Gamma, Global Africa Model United Nations Agency, by ACRP, Africa Climate Reality Project, ACA, African Climate Alliance, and we are being supported by ALA, which is the African Leadership Academy, as well as SACAN, which is the South African Climate Action Network. So the vision for ALCOY South Africa 2025. Like I said, we are building on the successes of ALCOY SA 2024, which aims to amplify youth voices in climate policymaking at both local and global levels. And the theme for ALCOY South Africa 2025 is just transition and local governance. And we'll be hosting a series of webinars between now, which is right now, until May. And the point of these webinars is to develop half of the youth recommendations for the U20. I'll speak on that a little bit further, but really do engage. This is just me also encouraging you guys to engage with us through the chat as well, and just share your comments as people are presenting, because we will be taking your comments into a bigger document, which will be the youth recommendations for the U20. In terms of ALCOY and how the in-person conference will look, day one of the conference will be a G20 simulation, which also aims to produce youth policy recommendations for the G20. And day two, we will be furthering those comments and finalizing it into a U20 policy paper, which will be titled Just Transition and Local Governance and Exploration of Urban. So ALCOY South Africa, the in-person event, will be on the 13th and the 14th of June here in Pretoria. More details on that towards the end. And the vision and essentially what we're planning is that we want to showcase urban governance as a lever for advancing the just transition through the U20 process, and we hope to collaborate with City of Tshwane as well as City of Johannesburg. And just briefly on the objectives of ALCOY. So similar to ALCOY South Africa 2024, we aim to amplify youth voices in policy making at global and local levels, and we want to equip our participants, which is you guys, with an understanding of multilateral engagements, climate finance mechanisms, and sustainable development and urban transformation. And in line with our theme, which I said is local, just transition and local governance, we aim to explore local governance as a lever for advancing the just transition. As most of us here, I'm pretty sure, are based in Gauteng, so it's very important for us to engage in that regard. And also, one of the key things we want to highlight with LCOY South Africa 2025 is to empower young people and to empower youth with practical negotiation skills and strategic policy making through simulation-based learning. And I will speak on that right now. So like I said, LCOY South Africa, the in-person event on the 13th and 14th of June, will consist of two parts. So day one will be a simulation of the Y20. And the aim of this is to really have, well, firstly, we want to highlight the fact that South African's presidency in the G20, and we want to basically create an environment that stimulates multilateral engagement and giving everyone an opportunity to engage in decision-making processes. We aim to have approximately 80 to 100 participants, and we'll divide them into thematic themes that focus on sustainability, climate issues, the just transition, urban resilience, as well as climate action. And the intent behind this is that we want to meaningfully engage amongst ourselves, but to also have engagements that are relevant to what is happening, hence our theme of the U20, the just transition. So each of the 5 tracks will comprise of roughly 20, maybe 30 participants, who will be structured in a discussion on assigned topics. And the intention is that we want to foster dialogue as well as policy formulation. Like I said, one of the key outcomes of LCOY is youth recommendations for the U20. Okay, on the events that we'll be having. So firstly, we'll be having webinars, like I said, to develop 50% of the statement. And the intention for that is that we are trying to target the U20 engagement groups, and they will be meeting under the leadership of Kotla in June, I believe. So on the 10th, as well as the 24th of April, we'll be having a webinar. So please do support our second webinar. And we're going to have a third webinar on the 8th of May. And the intention, once again, is to develop 50% of our youth statement. So come ready. Also ask as many questions as possible. And we will have an in-person event on the 13th and 14th of June, which will be the 2-day LCOY South Africa conference in Pretoria. Do follow us on social media. We'll be giving more details about that closer to the time. And around October, we are also aiming to have a post-LCOY event. So thank you so much. Back to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Londiwe. I'm hoping that everyone is now clued up on what LCOY is, what Yango is, before we get into the crux of it. Next up, one of our speakers is going to be tackling the G20, everything that has to do with what the G20 is. And this is Nerissa Muteyan. So Nerissa Muteyan is a junior G20 researcher at IJ, where she focuses on research and advocacy to advance civil society priorities within the G20 framework. As a researcher and data scientist, she is dedicated to bridging the gap between data, research, and policy to create more inclusive economic frameworks and drive positive societal change. Without wasting any further time, over to you, Nerissa.
Cool. Good evening, everyone. Berta, are you able to share my slides?
Yes, they'll come up just now.
Cool. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Nerissa Muteyan, and as the chair mentioned, I am a G20 junior researcher at the Institute for Economic Justice. I'm honored to be part of this important conversation today about how young people, especially in South Africa, can help shape climate solutions at both local and global levels. It wasn't that long ago I was actually attending these webinars, so it's quite a full circle moment for me to now be presenting at one. Today, I'm going to walk you through the G20, what it is, how it works, and most importantly, how you can be part of the change. So let's start with the basics, right? The G20 is short for the Group of 20. It's a powerful international space where the world's largest economies come together to shape solutions to global challenges. It includes 19 countries. You can see they're all listed on the slide, such as Brazil, China, India, South Africa, and the United States, as well as two regional bodies, the European Union and the African Union, which joined recently in 2023. Together, all of these members account for 85% of global GDP, over 75% of international trade, and nearly two-thirds of the world's population. But the G20 doesn't just talk about economics. It talks climate, it talks health, it talks education, it talks inequality. Whether it's shaping the price of food, the availability of jobs, or the future of energy transitions, the G20's decisions ripple into our daily lives, from how much you pay for your transport to how your city plans for climate resilience. And yet, most of us don't know how to engage with it or even that we can. That's why today is so important. It's about demystifying these big spaces and showing you that your voice can move the needle. So, how does the G20 actually function? There's no headquarters, there's no permanent staff. Each year, a different country takes on the presidency, which means they set the agenda and host the G20 summit. Last year it was Brazil, this year it's South Africa, the first African country to ever lead the G20. That alone makes this moment historic and filled with opportunity for the continent. There are two main tracks of work: the finance track, which is led by finance ministers and central bank governors, and the Sherpa track, which focuses on broader socioeconomic issues like climate change, education, health, digital transformation. Each track has several working groups made up of government officials, experts, and invited organizations. These working groups meet throughout the year to prepare the ground for the annual G20 summit. You'll also hear about engagement groups like the Y20, the C20, and the U20, which we'll be presenting later on. And these are called engagement groups, and they bring public voices, such as yours, into the G20 process. It's not just about government, it's about participation, accountability, and influence from people on the ground. Next slide, please. So, like I mentioned previously, this year is really historic, right? It's the first time the G20 has ever been hosted on African soil, with South Africa holding the presidency. This moment is more than just symbolism. It's a real opportunity to center African perspectives, African development goals, and African youth. South Africa's team focuses on solidarity, equality, and sustainability. This builds on the original G20 mandate, which focuses on promoting strong, sustainable, balanced, and inclusive growth. This is also a chance to push for concrete commitments on issues that matter most to us, such as climate finance, energy access, and youth unemployment. Climate change is one of the most urgent global threats we face. It's affecting everything from food systems to health systems, from jobs to housing, and from coastal cities to rural communities. The G20 plays a significant role in shaping the global response, whether through pledges, decisions, or subsidies, or declarations. But while these decisions are global, the impacts are local. They're felt in our communities through floods, heat waves, water shortages, or the rising cost of living. That's why local action is so important. It's not just about waiting for solutions from the top, it's about building climate justice from the ground up while pushing for more ambitious policies from global leaders. Next slide, please. Within the G20, climate issues, just transition issues are very cross cutting. They show up across many discussions, from finance to development. However, there are three main working groups that focus directly on this. The first one is the Sustainable Finance Working Group, which is based in the finance track. This group works to align global financial systems with climate and just transition goals. Their priorities include increasing transparency in financial markets, improving climate risk transparency, and unlocking climate finance So money for countries to afford just transitions, especially for developing countries. The second working group, the Environment and Climate Sustainability Working Group, is based in the Sherpa track. And this tackles core environmental properties such as nature-based solutions, water security, and disaster risk. They focus on promoting ecosystems while building resilience in vulnerable communities. Lastly, it's the Energy Transitions Working Group, which is also based in the Sherpa track. And this focuses on driving efforts to move from fossil fuels to clean, renewable energy, focusing specifically on access to affordable energy, accelerating clean energy innovation, um, fast forwarding the adoption of technologies that will help this transition happen, as well as ensuring a just transition that prioritizes workers and marginalized communities. While these are the main groups, obviously they are interconnected. And as young people, we need to stay engaged. We need to follow these discussions closely, and we need to push for real outcomes that go beyond commitments and lead to climate justice and just transition justice on the ground. So it's very important that you familiarize yourself with these groups, the priorities, and ensure that justice is actually being made, that progress is actually being made. Whether you're following the outcomes of the meetings, whether you're following the outcomes of the summit, it's very important to actually hold global leaders accountable. Now, in terms of why does this all matter? Because youth, all of you, are already the drivers of climate action. You bring urgency, innovation, hope, and most importantly, accountability. Local stories matter. When you speak up, you humanize the numbers, you humanize the situation. And when you organize, you build pressure for better policies. You force global leaders to make changes and make policies that prioritize your concerns. And when we connect across these borders, across these countries, we show what true global solidarity looks like. In terms of where you can come in and ways of engagement, you are not just the future. You're already leading climate solutions, you're innovating new ideas and building movements. And there are several ways to engage in these G20 processes. The first being the engagement groups, which the next two presentations will be on very specifically. Another thing is participating in national youth consultations. It's attending youth climate dialogue events like this one. It is advocating in your community or with local government. It's sharing your voice through storytelling, social media, and creative platforms. There's also a range of official G20 initiatives that are currently going underway that you can participate in, such as Open Days at DIRCO, which is the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. There's essay writing competitions. There's all these ongoing initiatives that you can participate in on a official G20 level. So while the G20 may seem distant, it's definitely within your reach. And when you show up, you can shift the conversation. Before we wrap up, I'd love for you to sit with these three reflection prompts. Firstly, what would a fair green city look like where you live, right? In terms of local governance, in terms of just transition. Secondly, if you had the chance to advise a G20 representative today, what would you say? What's the one just transition policy recommendation you would give? And lastly, how can your local story influence global action? How can your personal experiences lead to global change? You don't have to answer it now. You can save it for the Q&A. But I hope you carry these questions with you into your advocacy, your networks, and your future work. Next slide, please. Lastly, thank you so much for your attention, your passion, and your commitment to creating a better world. Let's keep pushing for a just transition, for climate justice, and for systems that center people and the planet. And I'm excited to hear your thoughts when we get to the Q&A session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for such an informative presentation, Nerissa. I'm so glad that you have some prompts to get everyone thinking. Please do share your comments in the chat box or write down some questions for Nerissa as we plan for the Q&A session. While we're still in the heat of things, we're going to move on to unpacking the U20 and what that is. And this presentation will be done by Doli Mafa, who is a Director of Sustainability Finance Mechanisms within Sustainability the City Sustainability Unit in City of Tshwane. She's responsible for identifying and leveraging on opportunities for low carbon and climate resilient financing. She drives the collaborative partnership and resource mobilization initiatives relating to climate change programs. Her job further entails building and managing relationships with sustainability funding and investment agencies or organizations. She led the development of the Sustainable Finance Mechanism and the Sustainable Public Procurement Strategy to support a low carbon, climate resilient, and resource efficient city of Tshwane. Dolly has acquired extensive experience of more than 15 years in different levels of local government by serving in various portfolios. Prior to joining City of Tshwane, Dolly served as executive manager in both local and district municipalities, where she was formulating and implementing procedures, systems, and controls to regulate specific work sequences and practices as dictated to municipality by legislations and bylaws. Dolly played a key role in providing technical and strategic guidance to municipal councils in the achievement of the key collaborations and performance areas. Besides her master's in business leadership from the School of Business Leadership in UNISA, Dolly has postgraduate diploma in development finance and holds her first degree in environmental health from Tshwane University of Technology. Currently, she is busy with her doctoral in business leadership at UNISA. Thank you so much for availing yourself, Mam Dolly. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Program Director. I really appreciate. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm very much grateful to be in this platform, and this is a good initiative. Well done to the team that organized the session. I'm just going to build on what Nerisha was indicating. That is a very good background about the G20. And to continue the story there is to say that U20 is one of the engagement groups that she was, if I'm not wrong, I think there are around 13 engagement group. There is business 20, civil 20, institution 20. There are several of them, but we are one of those engagement group. But this is an engagement group that is being convened by the two international organizations called C40 and UCLG. The cities that are member of U20, they are either a member of C40 or a member of UCLG or both. So there is no city which is not member of this. These are the conveners of U20. This is one engagement group that is not being convened by a national government or so. That is to give the background. So the cities, and we come together and then we develop what we call a communique, which is going to be a document that is going to be handed over to the G20. We have an executive team at the moment. She correctly says South Africa is for the first time that they are hosting G20. The same thing applies to U20. Our mayor and the mayor of the executive mayor of City of Joburg are co-chairing this this engagement group. We are co-chair and co-hosting for South Africa. So all these cities at the moment, South Africa is leading, and the mayor of Tshwane and mayor of Joburg, they are co-chairing this. Together with the conveners, we call ourselves the executive team, and we are the one that is doing the kind of the logistical planning. We do have partners, which are determined by the conveners and us as the chairperson. They are different. These partners, they are the one that supports content, what has to be the type of content that has to be driven through U20 elements. We have 40 participating cities, which we call them the members of a U20. They are spread about the regions, as Nerisha was also outlining. Every country that is participating in G20, some of the cities in that country, they are also members of the U20. In case of South Africa, last year it was only 3 cities: City of Johannesburg, City of eThekwini, and City of Tshwane. Even this year, we are the members. But besides the 40 participating cities, as the co-chair and the co-host, we invite other cities to observe what U20 is doing. In our case, they are spread Latin America. We have cities in North America, Europe. There are 20 observer cities. So in total, U20 is having 60 cities that will be coming to South Africa. In June, they will be hosted by City of Tshwane. In September, they will be hosted by City of Johannesburg. We have the 4 priorities as the U20, and these priorities are being led politically led by our executive mayor, but they share them globally to guide the U20 engagements: economic opportunities and financing, climate action and urban resilience, social inclusion and equity, digital transformation. They are aligned to our G20 priorities because we're actually working together with collectively. We're being guided by the programs of G20. And you may have heard the webinar arranging that align to U20. Yesterday, we're having one on the 15th Action and Urban Resilience. And I'm inviting you to join the webinars. They are exciting. They are global. All the cities that I've indicated, the youth and all the stakeholders are part of those webinars. So like I've already indicated, we will be hosting the Sherpa meeting in June. All the Sherpas in the 60 cities that I spoke to about, they will be coming to South Africa, City of Tshwane, CSIR on the 12th and 13th. So I've heard your dates as LCOY. We are kind of back to back on each other, which is great. I think that is how we are representing our country. In September, we will be having at the U20 Mayoral Summit. During June, we want to bring the African flavor. Nerisha, when she was presenting, she was saying that we want to bring the Africanism into the G20 element. So as the U20, we are also going to have a parallel session. We call it the African Mayors Assembly, which is aligned, and is aligned to the U20 or the Sherpa activities. Is just that here, the mayors of some of those African cities, they will be coming over. We will be hosting them. For those that know, we used to host an event called African Capital City Sustainability Forum. So we're bringing that version, but now in the U20 lineup. I've already indicated that we have arranged several events, the webinars, and that are there. We are left with 2 webinars. The next webinar is on the 15th of April. The other one is on the 15th of May, and then there will be another one on the 14th to 16th of May. That is the social inclusion and the food security. At the moment, today, I'm now in Bronkhorstspruit because we're doing public participation. As I'm speaking to you, we're doing public participation about U20 because we believe this should not be a boat.
Are you there, Sister Lee?
We seem to have lost Sister Lee's sound.
Ahmed, are you on the call? Maybe you can pick up from where Mamdali left off. I think she has indicated that she's having network problem.
Earl, are you able to reach her?
Yeah, sorry, I am trying to reach her on WhatsApp, and I will, if she doesn't join in the next 2 minutes, I'll then try and carry on using her speaking notes. So if you could just bear with us for a minute or two. Sorry.
Courtney, I think that's a lovely suggestion. While we are still waiting for the U20 team we can discuss some of Neris's prompts. So Courtney did drop them down in the chat if you missed them. But what would a fair green city look like where you live? You're welcome to answer in the chat, but also to just raise your hands and engage for a bit. You can answer either one of the prompts. So what would a fair green city look like where you live? If you were advising a G20 Sherpa, what would you say? And lastly, how can your local story influence global action?
Chair, I see that we have Sis Dolly back on the line.
Dumi.
Maybe, Dumi, we can please hold on to that point and then we can engage
I
further.
think they can continue engaging in the chat, but Sis Dolly, if you are able to continue, please do.
My apology. I think my network is very poor. I don't know where did I lose you? Where did we lose each other there? But you can move to the next slide. I think I've already passed into that slide. Move again. But I think what I was indicating is about our stakeholder engagement program that we are having for community outreach, because we will want to have the U20 aspect done at the community level. I was indicating that I'm now at the community hall in Bronkhorstspruit as part of the IDB process, but just to engage on the youth and the U20 activities. And I was also outlining the fact that youth is one of our the stakeholder which we regard as a city of Tshwane. Tshwane is one of the youthful city on which we have to make sure that we have programs relating to youth. We want to have the centering youth advocacy priorities in U20 discussions, which are aligned to South African presidency's focus. And as cities, we're gathering under the banner of U20, but it's also important for us to advocate for youth. And you'll see during June our programs or activities on the mayoral session that I was indicating, to say that there are some activities that are aligned to youth. So there is a meaningful youthful engagement in the city-led climate action as part of empowering the youth, and to ensure that there are spaces or platform created for youth to be part of those sessions. At Tshwane, we are very much committed to empowering youth. We are about to establish a youth network in the city to ensure that youth voices are not just heard, but are also empowered to shape. And this network will enable youth people to have the real and tangible impact. We brought together young people during the Youth Month last year. I think some of you were part of that. We had a very impactful session last year around June, on which we brought various organizations to come and engage about climate change, but in a youth platform. So we still want to strive towards those kind of engagements. And we believe that in partnership with LCOY, which I think it is not for the first time we're engaging with them, you are now starting to become our permanent partner. We appreciate that, but we are saying that ultimately our goal as a city is to help to bridge the implementation gap between the climate ambition and the action by ensuring that policies reflect the lived real
Mam Dolly? We seem to have lost Mam Dolly once more.
I think I can come in and just wrap up what Dolly was saying, just in terms of what the city of Tshwane is doing on youth engagement. And so as she was just quickly by way of introduction, my name is Amit Mogopo. a youth engagement and campaigns manager at C40 Cities. I manage what is called the C40 City Youth Engagement Network, and Swan is one of the cities that we're working with, really supporting cities on driving meaningful youth engagement in city-led climate action. And so, as Dolly was saying, that youth engagement in city-led climate action isn't just about empowering young people to influence policy, but also to shape and implement local climate action, as well as projects to have youth support cities in raising awareness about climate ambition, but then also building public and political support for climate action at the local level. As Dolly was also saying, that last year the city brought young people together for Youth Month in June 2024, engaging them in various activities, including tree planting, engagements with various organizations around good green jobs, the Gauteng agriculture, as well as economic development directorates were part of this engagement, as well as UNICEF, that provided a bit of a global overview in terms of really highlighting the importance of young people being part of processes like COP. And so just to wrap up, ultimately, the goal of the city is to bridge the implementation gap between climate ambition and action by ensuring that the city's policies reflect the lived realities as well as experiences of young people, and that is also informed by young people as well as women and other key stakeholders that are most affected and impacted by the climate crisis. And I'll wrap it up there. But yeah, if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer those during the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Ahmed, for just jumping in there and wrapping it up for Sis Dolly. And just for sharing, how the youth is being roped into some of the U20 activities. Please also share how we can register for the remaining webinars for U20, if you have that for us in the chat. And then we're moving on to our next speaker. So the Y20, which will be presented by Moeketsi Kwahela. Moeketsi is an education and training officer at the Youth Activism Program at the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. Moeketsi serves as chairperson of the National Youth Coalition, as well as in the Foundations for National Dialogue Process, representing the AKF. Moeketsi previously held a project assistant role responsible for training and development at the Development and Leadership Unit in the Center for Student Development at Wits University. Moeketsi holds a master's in sociology from Wits University. His thesis dissertation explored how is masculinity performed among male university students in an all-male residence at Wits. Moeketsi also holds a Bachelor of Arts honors in sociology and a Bachelor of Arts degree, having majored in psychology and sociology from the same university. Thank you so much for availing yourself. Over to you, Moeketsi.
Good evening, colleagues. Program Director, just to kindly confirm if I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Thank you so much. Good evening, colleagues and young people. My name is Moeketsi Kwahela, as was introduced by our Program Director, Letago. So yeah, I'm the Y20 co-chair. So I think, Program Director, with your permission, I'm just only briefly switching on my video just so that I can just be briefly visible, just for introduction purposes. I'm just going to switch it off for bandwidth purposes, but also to make sure that I don't experience the same challenges as the U20 colleagues. Would that be fine with you, Program Director?
That's absolutely fine.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, our colleague Nerissa provided a nice overview of the G20, right? And really, when us as young people, we came together in terms of the youth engagement group of the G20, we said to ourselves, all right, so listen, colleagues, this is a process that is coming to South Africa. South Africa will be chairing the G20 presidency from the 1st of December 2024. And really, as soon as it was quite clear to us that, in terms of the 3 strategic priorities that, the G20, in terms of our presidency in South Africa, will be taken, one of them, of course, to reduce poverty and tackling the high cost of living. The second one, of course, being building that capable and developmental state, and of course, driving inclusive growth and job creation, particularly through the 3 themes that have been highlighted for us in terms of solidarity, equality, and sustainability. We said to ourselves, how are we going to align ourselves in terms of not only those specific, 3 thematic areas around solidarity, equality, and sustainability, but also as well, what is going to be, our own focus, right, in terms of our Youth 20, to make sure that we are as inclusive as possible with our Y20, or this youth engagement group, that, young people, whether you're from the township, informal areas, rural areas, suburbia, inner city, but you're able to participate in this, right? So really, in terms of our own thematic area, as we're grappling with these issues, colleagues, we said, we are going to be young people who build bridges, right? And that we are going to unite for solidarity, we're going to champion equality, but also we're going to drive sustainability, right? And, we said, what are the key thematic areas that we can start thinking of, or the key thematic areas that, yes, we know that young people face many issues in our country, right? And of course, the continent and the globe. But we also said to ourselves, let's what are the key actionable items we can start with, that we know that if we start with these ones, as part of our final communique, and I'll take the colleagues through that later on in my presentation, that we know that we will be covered, right? But not only we will be covered, but it will allow us to address further issues, right? So our first key thematic area, as you see on the screen, is on climate change, environmental sustainability. What are those green horizons, right? Again, leading a just energy transition, which is, again, a key focus for tonight in terms of our webinar, and also the important work that the colleagues at LCOY, Africa Climate Alliance, and the other partners are working on, right? And then in terms of our second, thematic area is around inclusive economic growth and employment. What are those pathways to prosperity? Again, it's not a secret for young people who live in this country that, unemployment is one of the issues that, we are dealing with. And in fact, when you expand that definition of unemployment, whenever Stats SA releases those unemployment figures, there are young people who've also given up, right? And then the third one, we said AI is here, it is here to stay. But again, perhaps what are those ethical considerations we need to also have around AI, right? And we said to ourselves, we need to advocate for AI, digital innovation, education, and the future of work, right? We are trying to innovate, to elevate. We are building skills for tomorrow. And really what we mean by that, colleagues, is what are those key competency skills we want our young people from basic education level to high school to university, but also entrepreneurs who are doing amazing work within the AI space, right? But also, colleagues, the fourth thematic area that we said we should tackle is around meaningful youth engagement, of which I think this, webinar is also doing, but also how do we reform multilateral organizations for a just future? And really what we mean by that, colleagues, is that young people want to access these spaces, multilateral organizations, your UN spaces, your COPs, these conferences where, again, decisions are being made on our behalf. Where are we in the seat? But also, if we are in that seat, we are in that table, how are we meaningfully contributing to that, right? The last thematic area, that will inform our working groups and how we negotiate is around inclusive social development and fighting inequality. And again, we are very clear that we want to leave no one behind. And that is why, even in our work that we've started on, we've started reaching out, to young people, who are in the periphery, right? Young people who are not necessarily in the centers. And I'm talking about our rural youth and all those things. And we started about 2 weeks ago, with partnering up with the South African Institute of International Affairs, university roadshows, right? But also there'll be other roadshows where we target specifically, our rural youth, informal youth, township youth, and right, young people who are often not on these tables. It's important that they also know about the G20 specifically the youth engagement group in terms of the Y20, right? And really how our themes align with the G20 theme, particularly on solidarity, quality, and sustainability, and the other deliverables under G20 is that, one, we want to meet the needs of the present without, again, compromising the ability of future generations who are coming after us to meet their own needs, right? And the second, theme alignment is to say we want to ensure fair treatment and, of course, equal opportunities for all individuals and nations, right? And again, how do we create that inclusive future that is centered on people, specifically here, young people, right? And colleagues, what I want to do now is that I want to take you through the key objectives around how we've thought about, these thematic areas, but also, again, we, as part, the Y20 leadership, we've also emphasized that we are not married to these themes in the sense that, in these negotiation rooms, in the working groups that, we will be starting with very shortly. And again, I will let the colleagues know when we are starting, when I share our timeline. We want, when you guys get into these negotiation rooms, to dialogue and deliberate on these things, right? And what are some of the, when we start even with our draft zero, how do we, where do we pivot, right? What are our own blind spots, right? And it is important that, you guys participate in these working groups that are going to make sure that, again, in terms of our first thematic area with regards to climate change and environmental sustainability, one of the first objectives that we want to do here, well, the second one rather, is how do we advance dialogue on Africa's just energy transition, again, from coal dependency to renewable, sources, supporting, of course, equitable, resource distribution, right? And again, it's not a secret that in our country, load shedding is part of our everyday life, right? Our citizens, our young people are living in communities where they are hungry for electricity, they are hungry for water access, and, right? But also here, colleagues, in terms of one of our objectives, we want to, highlight in terms of the, climate change and environmental sustainability is how do we develop resilient strategies that not only consider, those local ecological, economic, and social conditions, but also how do we also align with African Union's Agenda 2063 goals for sustainable development? And the reason why we wanted to link as well with the AU Agenda 2063 is that, as one of the colleagues mentioned earlier on, that, it's a historical moment, right? That, the G20 is in the Global South, and we are the last Global South country that will hold the presidency up until we hand over to our US colleagues and goes back to the Global North. And we said we cannot miss this moment that we're in. And what we essentially mean is that it is important this is also seen as Africa's G20, right? We must engage with the AU Agenda 2063. Our young people must know, again, as part of reforming these multilateral organizations where these decisions are made on our behalf, how many of us know about the African Union, where it sits, right? Or the Pan-African Parliament, where it sits in Midrand, that there is a youth caucus in the Pan-African Parliament. How are we engaging with them to make sure that they're advancing climate change and environmental sustainability, again, those green horizons, and leading that just energy transition? And how does it look like for each and every one of our communities? But also here, we want to encourage policies, again, that promote job creation through innovation and, of course, entrepreneurship. Many of our young people are entrepreneurs, right? They're starting businesses. They've got businesses within the space of climate change. How do we better come up with policies that support them, particularly as well within emerging industries and sectors, of course, like technology, manufacturing, and, of course, the green and blue economy, right? It is important for young people to tap into that. Next slide, colleagues. And in terms of our, our third, thematic area, colleagues, around AI, digital innovation, skills development, and this future of work that we are envisioning, but also that we are working towards as we innovate to elevate, is that we really want to promote digital literacy here. And AI, AI skills, particularly for our young people in, basic education, and, of course, high school, that includes high school and universities, right? But also even ones who are not, right? So that they may be able to thrive in this global economy. Yes, we know that the current, geopolitical climate is fraught with tensions and all those things, but again, how do we, even within that, how do we ensure accessible education and technological training, right? And again, making sure that we center our young people in this, right? And again, what are these key competency skills that we might also not be aware of that also sit within this room in terms of our webinar, right? Next slide. The fourth, objectives around, meaningful youth engagement, and what we mean essentially when we say we want to reform multilateralism or multilateral organizations such as the UN and their many agencies, World WTO, the COPs, and the bigger conferences for this just future that, again, we are co-creating together. Is that, again, what are the key challenges that us as young people are facing in not only accessing, but also in participating in these multilateral processes and financial systems where, as I said earlier on, decisions are being made on our behalf. And it's important that we as young people, have a seat at the table. But also, I'm quite happy when I heard earlier on, when one of the colleagues in the introductions mentioned, how do we mobilize young people? Previous slide, colleagues. How do we mobilize our young people, in terms of, meaningful youth engagement, not only in foreign, but also in financial policy dialogues, again, focusing on transparency, inclusion, and equitable allocation of resources, again, policy, because I think it's important for young people to participate in policy. And we've stressed this as well as part of the Y20 team and the support team, that young people must participate in policy. And when these young people get into these 5 working groups, they'll be able to engage this policy. What is the South African position, on climate change, right? But also later on, what I want to do as part of perhaps local action, how do we meaningfully also engage with, the U20, right? Particularly the city of Tshwane, and of course the city of Johannesburg, and all the other cities that we live in, whether you are in Ekurhuleni, Sidibeng, Rand West Municipality, or the West Rand Municipality, right? Next slide. In terms of, our last, thematic area where we say we want to leave no one behind in terms of inclusive social development and fighting this inequality, the main objectives here that we really want to push, and, as part of our, our final communique and the other, high-level deliverables that we have that I will touch on right now, is how do we strengthen youth engagement, again, as part of co-creating solutions for poverty, for public health and food security. And certainly we know the impact that climate change has had on not only our public health, but certainly on food security as well, right? But also on matters of poverty. And like I said earlier on, our young people are living in communities where they're hungry for water access, they're hungry for electricity, among many other things. But also, colleagues, what we want to do here is that we want to take advantage of the global platforms or multilateral platforms that we already sit in as a country, right? Such as the Global Leaders Network on Women, Children, and Adolescent Health, where our president sits in, where he makes inputs on our country's behalf. How do we mobilize already, places that we are already in to further advance our young people's agenda, right? And again, part of here, we want to develop, again, these youth leadership initiatives that lead, again, social behavioral change initiatives that foster that sense of community responsibility and participation, access, inclusivity, and all those things. And in terms of really how the Y20 team and structure looks like and how we've configured ourselves, colleagues, for those who might not still be aware, what led into this, our team and structure configuration and all those things. We have Raymond Matlala, who is our chair, who is from the South African BRICS Youth Association, young people doing phenomenal space within the BRICS space, Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, and all those things. And of course, myself, Mweketsi Kwahela, as co-chair from the National Youth Coalition, right? And then of course, Hannah Hopper from the South African Youth in Diplomacy. Hannah and the colleagues from Said have been doing phenomenal work with regards to training, South African delegates when we've went to other, previous Y20s in the other countries. And then in terms of the Sherpa, who will be assisting us, in terms of acting as the chief negotiator, leading in those policy discussions and drafting our Y20, final communication, from draft 0 up until we hand it over to the head of states, but also the social summit. We have Levi Singh, who sits within the SET Regional Trust, which also is a member of the National Youth Coalition. But again, of course, Brittany K is our Sous Sherpa, who will be supporting the Sherpa in terms of, those negotiations, that policy formulation, and of course, stakeholder coordination. In terms of, again, as part of inclusivity, we said, because every country can pivot and we can leave it to our discretion in terms of the engagement groups, how we configure ourselves. We said, let's open up space for more young people to come in, right? We have Mohammed Kasim, who is the co-head of the Secretariat. He's from Project Potential, which sits also under the National Youth Coalition, doing phenomenal work within the grassroots space. And we also brought in Denise Rapizzi, who is the CEO of the Youth Chamber in Commerce and Industry, right? Young people doing phenomenal work within the entrepreneurship space. Again, mainstreaming our young women who are doing work in that, and of course, mainstreaming youth as well. Next slide, colleagues. And again, also what you're able to see from this team and structure, we had to read the room, and we're saying, the G20 presidency is also coming at a time in which, again, we are in the 7th administration of the country, right? The government of national unity. Let also our Y team and structure reflect that GNU moment. And really, the ways in which we are going to lead in terms of these working groups, in terms of advocacy and engagement, is that we're going to have policy roundtables and workshops. And I'm hoping that many of you will participate in that. And I certainly recognize a few names who signed up to be part of the working groups, to be part of the South African delegate as well. And we're also going to have, provincial and regional consultations. We've started on that, and we will, again, make sure that we are as inclusive as possible in terms of communication, so that you may be able to participate in that. Again, we're very intentional about access, and part of that means having awareness campaigns in rural areas, right? But also we've engaged our international counterparts in the African continent, particularly the AU and particularly the Women, Youth and Directorate and Gender Directorate within the AU, so that, again, we may tap into African youth as well to, inform our final communique. And again, international engagements with the EU, US, Asia, and Latin America. And we've really had productive engagements with the previous Y20s that have held the Y20 to advise us as well. Our Brazilian counterparts, advise us as well in terms of how we can go about things, what worked, what didn't work, and all those things, right? Next slide. And really, as part of this next slide, it also takes you through what we mean by, plenary sessions, the working groups, the panel discussions, the cultural and networking events, and also the final communique that will go into that, right? And essentially here, these are platforms where yourselves as young people are really going to engage with high-level speakers, experts, policymakers, again, specifically on climate change, and the other 4 thematic areas, again, as part of what do we need to advocate for, right, in terms of climate change, and particularly in our cities where we live, in our municipal wards and all those things, right? Next slide. And in terms of our timelines, I mean, right now we're in the May-June 2025. Many of you, would have signed up, in terms of the expression of interest, participating in the working groups, in these 5 working groups, but also, to be part of the South African delegate negotiating in those rooms. We will be releasing the results in the next coming 2 weeks with our colleagues who are doing the applications for us. And then again, even if you're not part of those working groups, even if you're not part of, you're not chosen as the South African delegation, certainly, I promise you, you will participate, right? In terms of the workshops we will be having in the provinces, in the local communities themselves, right? But again, here in terms of this timeline, I think what would be relevant to share is, the 3-level deliverables. Obviously, the final communication, where we will basically be handing to the head of states to say, this is what the young people have said in terms of climate. This is what young people have said in terms of education and skills, in terms of AI, global health, and. But again, so that is the first, high-level deliverable, our final communique. But also, colleagues, one of the challenges that we've experienced with Y20, by the way, Y20 is the oldest engagement group, right? Plus minus, 15 years in existence. But also, part of the challenge is that we are trying to address elitism, right? With our Y20, we are saying Y20 cannot be for only the elites, right? And essentially what we're trying to say there is that we're trying to establish, we're going to establish a Y20 Sherpas Council and also a Y20 Alumni Association. Again, key deliverables that we want you guys to participate on, because again, for us, what we want to do is that we want to track the progress that will be coming out from the Y20 South Africa, right? We want to say in 3 years, in 4 years, in 5 years, when we go to the other, G20s, wherever the presidency will be. But remember, in South Africa, we said this, right? We said in terms of climate change, we want young people to basically be involved in their municipalities and all those things, to tackle waste and all those things. And basically, the Shepherds Council, but also the Alumni Association, that is how we want to track the Y20 final communique in terms of the recommendations we will be having, right? Next slide, colleagues. And in terms of how you get in contact with us, that is our, contact information, our website. I noticed that the colleagues Mudiehi has shared, the Y20 website that you can go and engage on. That is our email address. But also this is where, if you want to have more information, social media, we're available, LinkedIn, Twitter, or X, former Twitter rather, TikTok, we are also available. But also we realize that not everyone, we're also young people experiencing the digital divide, right? And part of having these provincial roadshows and workshops in communities within the Y20 engagement group is so that we reach young people who do not have access to the internet, right? But perhaps, colleagues, as I wrap up my presentation, one of the key questions that was asked was around, what are the specific actions that we can take, or some of the key demands that we as young people can make as it relates to advocating, for climate change, the just energy transition, and all those things. And I think I'm happy that the U20 colleagues came before me, because, colleagues, I think as young people, we don't do enough to engage our municipalities when it comes to waste, right? How many of us know that there are Section 79 committees that, for example, there's a Section 79 committee in each and every municipality that deals with environment, infrastructure, and waste, right? And really, I saw that we have a young man here named Zona Mboni. So he's a program manager within the ASRI, which is the Orwell Socioeconomic Institute. And they are doing phenomenal work in getting young people to participate, for young people to be co-opted within Section 79 committees, again, to make sure that young people are in that table. And young people, when it comes to, for example, environmental waste within our cities, they're making contributions in those spaces. Young people are sharing their lived experiences of what it means to live in communities where we are, experiencing dumping waste, or we are living next to landfills, for example. And in essence, what are the key policies or the bylaws, in fact, that we can influence to make sure that, again, as part of the work of leading this just energy transition. And I think, the LCOY colleagues and the colleagues in the room, we need to do as young people, we need to mobilize ourselves, as part of engaging our municipalities, particularly because they've got constitutional duties, again, to provide waste management services, but also regulating waste management activities, in our communities, right? How many of us are engaging, again, with the Department of Water, that deals with the environmental, stuff in terms of our communities, the strategy that they have, right? The, national, environmental waste strategy, and the pillars that they have. How many, it simply cannot be, as officials contributing in that. It is important for us as young people to participate in those processes, whether at a municipal level through the Section 79 committees, or engaging the policy and the bylaws that have been proposed by the municipalities themselves, but also the national department, right? And in essence, I'm saying all of these things as part of that the demands that we have, those key issues that we can also advance within these working groups of the Y20, right? What are you experiencing in your community that you can input in the communique that we want to submit to the heads of states in November, but also the social summit, that will also be happening in November as well. Again, being inclusive as far as possible, providing access to young people, being in those tables, but also meaningfully contributing in those tables. Colleagues, I think I'm going to wrap it up there in terms of time. And I think any other thing that I might not have addressed, that I might have wanted to address, but also some of the Q&As. I think the Q&A session, or any clarifications that the colleagues might have from not only myself, but the colleagues who've presented, but also from the LCOY colleagues. We are here, we are ready to listen, and we are ready to engage. Program Director.
Thank you so much, Mogezi, for such wonderful insights on the Y20. Thank you for going in depth, and thank you to all our speakers for just giving us key insights on the G20, Y20, and U20. And now we've come to the really exciting part of our program where we are going to engage in a Q&A. So to all of our participants that have been taking in all of this information, let us know, let the speakers know, do you have any questions for them? Are there any suggestions for these different platforms? Please do not hesitate to raise your hands and actually open your mics and engage with us. But if you feel a little bit uncomfortable, you're more than welcome to drop your questions, suggestions, or comments in the chat, and we will address them from there. I think just to kick us off, this would be a question for all of our speakers. How do we move from youth being heard to youth having decision-making power, especially on some of these international platforms? So either one of our speakers can take that on.
Program Director, is it directed to a particular speaker or?
It's directed to all the speakers, but since your mic is open, you can answer first.
Do you mind just repeating the question for me? Apologies.
Sure. How do we move from youth just being heard to youth having decision-making power on these international platforms?
I think for me, mobilizing. I think we need to mobilize ourselves as young people to be, in fact, in these rooms. But also what I mean by mobilizing and even organizing ourselves, I mean, for example, today we're having this webinar under, LCOY, South Africa, right? And you guys are doing, LCOY is doing phenomenal work within the cities in terms of, climate change and all those things. But why aren't many of our young people in those rooms, right? I think one, we need to organize ourselves as young people and while mobilize and organize, right? But also conscientize ourselves on what is climate change, right? And I think part of this also means we also need to do work on language, right? I think for me, climate change, I think, we make the mistake of thinking it's a new language, but it's always been there, colleagues, right? We live in communities where we know whether you're living in a community that is affected by wetlands, or we are seeing now what's happening when it rains in KZN and all those things. But our parents have been speaking about this in terms of, right? And, to translate that into English, there's something about the climate that's changing and all those things. So I think also we as young people, we need to organize ourselves to say, guys, the LCOY colleagues are organizing a conference. Let's show up in numbers. Let's make noise about this thing, right? I think as young people, oftentimes we are also working in silos, right? And yes, it's important, of course, to have young people who are doing climate work, young people who are doing municipal and oversight work, young people who are doing work in food security and all those things. But what is also going to bring us together so that, and again, that is why even when we, in terms of the Y20 thematic groups, we said, yes, young people are facing many, many issues. We know that. But what are the 5 key, when we narrow things down, when we summarize, what are the key issues that we can focus on that will enable us to expand into the other areas? But also as we mobilize and organize ourselves as young people, what are we also in these rooms? Who are we reaching out to? I don't take for granted the importance of an email. Are we in these municipalities? Are we contributing in the integrated development plans, the IDPs, right? Those processes are often politicized, but also we as young people, we need to come in numbers into those rooms to say, no, I'm a young person who lives in the city of Tshwane. I'm a young person who lives in the city of Johannesburg.
Sorry about that. Can we please mute our mics?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to mute, but they keep unmuting.
No worries, program director and Courtney. It's young people, right? It's that spirit of youth, right? And again, how do we mobilize that spirit of youth that also rebels now and again to be in those rooms to basically say, no, 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 no. What you guys are saying as the officials, as the politicians and all those things, we are young people and we are affected by electricity. I'm a young person who's running a quota business, right? This thing is affecting me. I'm a young person, the water stream, I live in Alexander. The Jaskei River is making me sick, right? So I think we also as young people, we need to stop these divides and come together, right? And by coming together, platforms like the LCOY, the conferences that and the workshops that the LCOY colleagues organize, how do we make them more accessible? How do we come into those spaces and say, young people in Lenasia are facing this, young people in Bosmont are facing this, young people in rural Eastern Cape are facing this. So that is just my brief input. Program Director.
Thank you so much, Mogeti, for that response. We have a question in the chat, and it says, are Y20/LCOY in-person events sponsored? So transport, accommodation, and meals. Mogeti, you'll speak to Y20, and I think, Londi, you can speak to LCOY.
If I can allow Londi to go first, and then I'm happy to come in so that my voice is not the only voice in the room.
Okay, no, thank you, Mweketi. In terms of is LCOY sponsored? I think when you mean accommodation, you also mean overnight accommodation. Unfortunately, no, we don't sponsor accommodation. But if you are based in Gauteng, we usually do have pickup spots to take people to the event and back. And then meals, I also think you maybe mean also in terms of accommodation. No, we don't have that. But during the conference, yes, there are meals. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Londi. Colleagues, for us as the Y20, again, as part of inclusivity and opening up space, we are very much open to partnerships, right? So we do have a stakeholders and relations team, and we are really happy to facilitate those resources as well with the LCOY colleagues. And in fact, we will be sharing as well the Y20 endorsement for the LCOY. And we are hoping that what that will do, we will also be able to, again, as part of this organizing and mobilizing, it will mean that we are able to go into the other engagement groups that have more money than us, more resources like the B20, and say, B20 colleagues, business colleagues. We also have young people within business. Young people in the Eastern Cape want LCOY and Y20 to come to them to speak about climate change. Can you assist us with resource mobilization, particularly finances? Young people are still building their financial resources. We are still doing much work in terms of saving. So please sponsor that transport, that catering, that venue if we must pay for it. But again, as part of the organizing and mobilizing ourselves, we can also tap into other resources that young people have of. If it means we must be in a church, we must be in someone's shack, we must be in someone's house to conduct these workshops, we will do that.
Thank you so much. Dauda, do you also have a response to the question, or is it something else?
Yes, I wanted to just add a few points on the first question that was asked. And my apologies, I'm in a train traveling, but that question really interests me so much because I'm someone who is really passionate about young people being involved in the policy making processes beyond only being consulted when they're making these policies. And maybe the first point that I just wanted to add is that as young people, we really need to demand formal representation in decision-making bodies. And I think this is what most of us are lacking in our government institutions and so on. You see that a lot of times government do a lot of things without having youth perspectives in those things that they do. And I'll give you an example in my country. When we had our LCOY last year, one of our key resolutions is that we need to have a youth representative in our national environment management body. This is where you have the president of the country, the National Environment Agency's director, and the Minister of Environment. There is no youth representative to advise them on youth matters and climate change. And we have been pushing since last year to ensuring that we have a rep, and we've we are making some steady progress when it comes to that. And the next point, I think us as young people, we should also look beyond the LCOY, beyond conferences. After conferences, what do we want to achieve? Do we want to continue having LCOYs every year, developing national youth statements, and at the end of the day, repeat the same process every year without having to follow up and making sure that we have task forces who are making follow-ups with government agencies who are responsible for implementing those policy demands that we are making. So that is something that we also started in my country last year. We started LCOY since 2022, but we have not had something like that. We started it last year, and this year, I can assure you that we are able to have 2 representatives to be part of our national delegation when it comes to the COP this year, which the government is going to support. But also, we are working on having a national youth negotiators program in the Gambia, which will train young people so that there can be a succession plan when it comes to negotiators in the country. So these are some of the examples that I wanted to show as to how young people can move from being heard to being part of decision-making processes. So thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your inputs, Dauda. Before I take you to Duzile, there's a comment in the chat that says the biggest challenge when it comes to youth involvement is not the lack of willingness to participate, but it's the lack of information. More efforts can definitely be made to mobilize young people with the heart to shape communities. And I think it also highlights the importance of platforms such as this. Buitumelo, now that you have been on this platform and you've been capacitated, you're part of the youth that is now responsible for also speaking to other youth and giving them this kind of information. So there is a lot of work that is being done, but you're right in saying that the efforts are never enough. But there definitely is a lot of work. There's a lot of work being done on different social media platforms in different grassroots communities. And you being here is testament to some of that work that is being done. Duduzile?
Hi all, thank you so much, speaker. My name is Duduzile, and thank you to all the speakers for such great presentations. So I would like to find out, how does the Y20 ensures that its recommendations are usually or would really be reflected in the G20 policy decisions, and how can young people track that? And another question that is meant for Ms. Buthelezi is, what is one mistake that you see young change makers make or delegates often make, and how can we avoid that since we're embarking in this journey? Thank you.
Nerissa, if you are still available, are you able to take the first question? So how are the recommendations from the Y20 taken up into the G20 policies?
Sure, I'll come in here. So, as my colleague from the Y20 mentioned, one of the outcomes is a declaration of recommendations, right? And so the Y20 does all these working groups, all these events, and they create this declaration of recommendations. And then at the end of the year, just before the summit, there's a meeting with all the engagement groups. So the Y20, the C20, the U20, the B20, all of them, right? And they submit this declaration to the G20 ministers. The G20 ministers then look at it and see kind of where it can be inputted. It's not necessarily a guarantee that the exact recommendations will be taken in, purely because keeping in mind the G20 is a consensus space, right? So all 19 countries and both regional bodies will have to agree. The best way to track it would be to actually track the Y20 declarations, the U20 declarations, and then track the actual G20 declarations. But what happens is this is a very negotiated process between the G20 Sherpas
Nerissa, you are muted.
Yeah, I think that's it. I'm happy to answer any more in-depth questions, but I think that's a good summary of the process.
All right, thank you so much. Londiwe, are you able to take the second question?
Yes, could you just please repeat it for me?
Duduzile, are you able to repeat the question?
Yes, I can. So my question was, what is one mistake you see young change makers make, and how can we avoid that? Thank you.
Okay, yeah. I would say I wouldn't necessarily say it's a mistake, but I think just something that we all need to consider as young people, especially young people from the global south, is that we need to consider our communities as we continue to engage, especially when engaging on international platforms, because I think a lot of times, especially within this climate space, even the solutions that are being provided sometimes don't really speak to our realities. So, for example, as South Africans, we need to but we need to have very realistic solutions. But solutions, when I say realistic, I also mean solutions that speak to our reality from apartheid, for example. So if we're going to talk about climate action and adaptation mitigation, we need to look at how apartheid and the legacy of apartheid has affected our communities, so that when we continue to engage, especially in international platforms, we're able to speak on our realities and not necessarily absorbing everything and allowing the global north and western countries to dictate to us how climate action should look. So just to summarize, I would say a mistake that we sometimes fall into is that when we are on international platforms, a lot of times we succumb to international pressure, for lack of a better word. And we need to be able to speak to our realities and also advocate for indigenous knowledge, for example, whenever we go onto these platforms, whenever we want to go about our activism. So I hope I answered you. If I didn't, we can just continue this conversation in the chat as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Londiwe. I'll jump back to the chat to read some comments. One from Dumi, who says, I agree with getting involved in our municipalities, especially on a ward level. I know many young people who don't know that ward meetings are open to the public and it is the first port of call for your community. Absolutely. And then Nolwazi also says, I agree with Moiketsi. For example, Madoli is holding a public participation event at my local hall in Broncosbraid, and I was not even aware. This speaks to us as the youth indeed working in silos, which divides our voice as youth. Grateful indeed for this platform. My pledge is to go out there and mobilize for more youth people to get involved. I definitely took down some key points on getting involved with our local municipalities. Thank you so much for those comments. And while I'm still there, just speaking on the municipality side, Ahmed, if you can maybe come in, what does it look like when young people successfully influence or contribute to sustainability work at municipal level?
Well, thank you so much. It's a really good question and also quite a tricky one to answer, because I think there's I think we've seen different sort of like success stories happening in different parts of the world, but like I think a lot of the examples that I am able to provide are from more of like a sort of like global north perspective. But I think maybe kicking it off with like a more local example is Johannesburg's climate action plan. In 2017, when the city was developing its climate action plan, in collaboration with the youth at the South African Institute of International Affairs, so youth at SAIA, they were able to include young people's perspectives into that climate action plan. And so in part, the city's cap is influenced by young people. But like, I mean, I think part of your question is more focused around like what have been the sort of like outcomes of youth engagement in city level climate action. And I think a really powerful example is in New Zealand, in Auckland. What the city did was that they enabled the young people to participate in the city's climate budgeting process. And so young people were empowered to really shape how the city spends some of its budget on climate-related initiatives, and this has had some like very positive outcomes in terms of ensuring that the city is spending public funds in ways that young people have shaped, and so there are those type of examples where we are seeing that young people's input into these processes do have direct really positive outcomes for residents in cities. And I think maybe just like one last example to give was in Seattle, young people, the mayor of the city organized a transport conference. And at the conference, young people were empowered to, shape some of the city's policies. And one of the key demands made by young people was that, public transport in the city was quite expensive. And, going from home to school, like it was quite pricey for a lot of families. And so following that conference, which took place in 2023, the city, decided to make public transport free for young people under the age of 18. And so these are mainly school-going young people. And so I think there are many examples, there's sort of, sorry, not many, but like there are, very scarce examples of where young people have been given the space to really shape policies at the local level. But I think, especially in the work that I'm doing with cities, what we are seeing now is that more cities like Tshwane are actually looking at creating these platforms for young people to more directly shape climate action in their cities. And so, as Dolly was saying, that this just goes beyond seeing young people as advocates for climate action, but really empowering them to take up spaces in cities to support their cities with planning, as well as also implementing on climate policies. And positively, we're seeing cities in Africa like Freetown, like Nairobi, Lagos, who are exploring and building the case with their city councils around the importance of establishing these type of mechanisms that truly empower young people to take a seat at the table and shape city-led climate action.
All right. No, thank you so much. Good to highlight that while historically there wasn't a lot of examples, that the city of Tshwane is moving towards, including the youth. And hopefully we will be able to engage a lot more with you guys on that. Mwekezi?
Thank you, Program Director. I just wanted to briefly contribute to the question that was asked around how are we going to track the Y20 recommendations or our communique. That is why I even so two things in terms. That is why I said in terms of our high-level deliverables, we want to establish the Y20 Sherpas Council, but also the Y20's Alumni Association, and part of that means that we will be able to track those recommendations that young people would have made as it relates to climate change, for example, right? And part of the reason why Y20, recommendations in the past were not implemented or there was no tracking system is that, the Y20 doesn't, unlike the C20 or even the U20, we don't have something like the C20. They've got what is called the International Advisory Committee, which is a permanent committee that says that it is able to advise but take on the work of the other previous C20s, right? And that's also what we want in terms of our final communique, to say through the Sherpas Council that has negotiated, we came together, right? We didn't just come to talk for the sake of talking. We negotiated, we convinced each other, we said this must go into the final communique, and the Sherpas Council and the Alumni Council will allow us to track, to say, okay, fine. So next year, the G20 presidency is going to the US, right? We propose that in terms of climate, we need to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The US colleagues, are you able to also implement that in your, for example, the colleague who just came in before me now was speaking about some of the phenomenal work that's been done in that country, despite their problems, in terms of, municipalities or mayors who are saying, young people must be in the table, young people experiencing transport challenges. right? And this is what we want to do. And I want to link that with my second, to ask the king to answer the question around young people and how do they get involved also in municipalities. And like I mentioned even earlier on, colleagues, we must engage in Section 79 committees. This is the work that, you know, the ASRI colleagues are doing in terms of oversight and accountability, right? Oversight and accountability or Section 79 committees, you know, that is where really, for example, if you're looking at City of Johannesburg, the Committee on EISD, Environment, Infrastructure, and so on, right? They're responsible for 3 entities: City Power, King Joburg Water, and what is it? City Power, Joburg Water, and Rent King, Joburg Water, and I'm forgetting the last one, right? But those are playing key roles within the environmental space within the City of Johannesburg. In Tshwane as well, there is an EISD Section 79 committee. Who is the chairperson of that committee? How do we engage with the chairperson of that committee to bring us as young people who live Komabopani in Soshanguve or wherever in the city of Tshwane or wherever in the city of Johannesburg or whichever municipality that you are part of, right? I think it is also important that for us as young people to engage legislation, because colleagues, again, this thing is in the Constitution. The Constitution in terms of our Bill of Rights, you know, Section 24 rather, it's already there. We are guaranteed this thing that we have a right to an environment that is not harmful to our health or our well-being, right? Again, let's engage the National Environmental Management Waste Act of 2008, right? And of course, in terms of our municipalities, are we engaging in the Local Government Municipal Systems Act, right? It's specifically Act number 32 of 2000 that says the public, we young people, the public, we must have an opportunity to comment on these key bylaws around the public health hazards that we are seeing, the health hazards that we are seeing, and these things are affecting us, right? In terms of the spaza shops and all those things. So yes, it's one thing to say spaza shops must register, but how many of the health inspectors are actually doing this work? How many health inspectors are at the City of Tshwane? How many health inspectors are at our different municipalities? Where are they? Why are they not doing their job, right? So it's important for us as young people to highlight these issues. But as we're highlighting them, also we say, employ us then, make us health inspectors, equip us with the skills to be health inspectors, sponsor our degrees and all those things. You know, how do we engage in that policy work again to effect this change? Thank you, Program Director.
Thank you so much for such passionate insights. I want us to get into the prompts that Nerissa had given us. So please continue to add your questions into the chat. Mwekezi and Ahmed are around. The team from LCOY is also around, and they'll be responding to your questions as they come in. But what I would like is some engagement around the prompts that Nerissa gave us earlier on. So what would a fair green city look like where you live? Secondly, if you were advising a G20 Sherpa, what would you say? And lastly, how can your local story influence global action? Please feel free to open your mic and answer these prompts. Alternatively, you can do so in the Dumi, do you have an answer for us?
Yes, hello. My name's Dumi and I live in the city of Cape Town. I specifically moved to the city of Cape Town to realize a fair green city. But upon arriving here some years ago, I realized that there's so much mass inequality when it comes to specifically access to sustainable resources. And maybe the two biggest issues there are location, especially your distance to the central city of Cape Town, as well as finance. And for me to actually realize what it means to live in a fair green city is when all citizens in that city can equally benefit to all of the different, different kinds of accesses to being able to form an organization, to be able to participate, for example, in policy. Another thing that would be great is if the locations can actually start to look a little bit similar, because if you move from one area in the city of Cape Town to another one, you actually can visually see the disparity between different areas, and you know that the lived realities of the people in different areas of Cape Town are so different, especially when it comes to socio-political factors, and those really affect the idea of living in a fair and green city. So I'm very interested, particularly in the work of the Y20 when it comes to that, because to realize, I think, a fair green city is, how do you bring together all of the different organizations and individuals across the city in order to create one voice, for example. And I heard mention of roadshows. So I'd be really interested to know what those roadshows look like, and where they'll be going around, because the disparity between cities, it's very difficult to realize a fair green city.
Thank you so much, Tumi. I hope that Nerissa has been taking points and will engage further on that. Is there anyone else that is open and available? Nozwelo? I see you are unmuted. Right, Lindile?
Greetings and good evening, colleagues. I am Ulindile Shozi, connecting from KZN. And for me, I'll just touch base on the first point, or the first question. So within KZN, I'm originally from a rural area called the Kanabout in Potchefstroom, which is the lower south, the south coast of KZN. But currently I'm in Pietermaritzburg due to and work. And notably, both areas have issues of waste management. And I think it's something that I've brought up in a lot of platforms, in terms of, in rural areas, there's still that issue that there are no waste trucks, there are no proper waste management practices that are in place. And it's unfortunate that in most cases that still people adhere or contribute into digging a hole, either collectively burning waste or collectively digging a hole and just burying it there. And similarly to Pietermaritzburg, I'm living in a more suburban area within Maritzburg, but there's an issue with the landfill site that it's so close to settlements. Going to the CBD as well, there's a lot of waste management issues. And I think 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, President even took it to the ground to boycott all these waste and the infestations that was being brought upon. So the change I'd like to see in a green city is a proper waste management, making sure that waste is recycled and just minimizing waste being sent to landfills, being more inclusive. And there is still 2025, there's still an issue of dissemination of information within rural areas and marginalized communities. As youth, we, in the organization I'm in, we do engage communities, but many are still very much confused. I think one of the speaker did mention that sometimes you just need to communicate in languages that not scientific or not academic, but rather not in a language that's more understandable, like language. Because they've been noticing that the weather is changing, weather events are extreme, as they're not as previously. So just that education awareness continuously, and a lot of community engagement and participation, and being inclusive in all policy settings would be great. And also keeping in mind that there are marginalized communities, there are rural settings, and there are communities that are not within the urban areas or the townships that are also needed in a just transitions as well. I think I'd end it there for now.
Thank you so much, Lindile, for sharing with us what this looks like in your community and where you come from. Please continue engaging in the chat. I see that there are a lot of resources that are being shared, so please continue asking questions, sending through your comments and suggestions. The team and the speakers are responding to you. Before we move on to our final speaker for the night, we've put together a short feedback form to hear your thoughts on tonight's webinar. So what worked well for you, what we can improve on, and what topics you'd love to see in upcoming sessions. So the team will drop the link in the chat, and it only takes 2 to 3 minutes. We really encourage that you please fill in this feedback form before leaving the webinar. With that said, I will be giving the floor to Simpiwe, who will be giving us our closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. As mentioned, I am Simpiwe. I don't know why I am part of the Gambit team and one of the co-contact people for LCOY. To thank every single one of you for attending the very first LCOY series 1 of 3. And with that, we'd also like to invite you to please register for the second LCOY webinar series 527. So same time, different day, which is
Simpiwe? We have lost you there a bit. I think you can maybe turn off your camera and then maybe just leave your mic on for bandwidth purposes.
Yes, let me do that. Thank you. Next week, Thursday, 17th April from 5 to 7 o'clock. Really hope to see each and every single one of you there. So please do register to join us. We'll be speaking about the just transition and how, as the youth of South Africa, we can be a part of the just transition through the LCOY processes. And now that you've learned a lot about what LCOY is and how to be involved in LCOY, as well as the G20, Y20, and U20, hopefully the next webinar on the just transition will give you a bit more content on how else you can get involved. So once again, thank you everybody and good evening.
Thank you so much, Simpiwe. Thank you to everybody for joining the webinar.
Sorry, Chair, to interrupt you.
Sir?
The next webinar is on the 24th of April, and then the third one is on the 8th of May.
Thank you so much. I'm actually going to ask that you drop that in the chat as well. But also please do drop your email addresses in the chat so that this information can also be communicated with you, along with some of the resources from today's webinar. Please don't exit without filling in the feedback form. It really helps us service you as the youth so much better. But thank you so much again for your participation, for engaging in today's webinar. Thank you to our speakers for unpacking key insights on the G20, Y20, and U20. That is all from us at LCOY. See you in the next webinar.